Hello and welcome back, everybody in the main hall. I hope you had interesting and inspiring sessions and learned something that you didn't know before. I hope that you learned how to be able to encourage change or how to face certain changes, how to use things to move to the future. And I'm very happy that now we are coming to our last session of the bridge building part of the summer forum. So the last session where we have our visiting program participants with us. And I'm super excited that once again we have a real bridge building element here, because we have the US perspective and the German perspective, and we have very experienced remembrance workers who will tell us a little bit more also about what it means personally to be involved in this kind of work, and what the resonances, can you say that? Resonance? Yeah. Is or are to this kind of work. And so, yeah, I want to welcome Dave Tell and Angelika Rieber and Karlos Hill. And Karlos Hill is so kind to facilitate this this conversation, and I will just hand it over to you and enjoy the conversation, and we will have room for some questions at the end. And yeah, see you later.
Thank you so much, Lily, for that introduction. And I'm so grateful to yet again be able to talk with this distinguished group about a really, really important topic, grassroots approaches to commemorative work, remembrance work. We have really two individuals who exemplify how to do that at the grassroots level, both in Germany and in the United States. I am a remembrance worker. I do remembrance work mostly in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma City. Dave Tell has done much of his work in the Mississippi Delta, where I also am from or have lived for a time. And Angelika Rieber doing work for so many years in Frankfurt. I'm so excited for us to be in conversation about really not just the remembrance work that we have been doing that's connected to descendants and survivors, but really what have been the local responses to that really important work that you've been doing. But also what we really want to center is how your relationship to this work. And I know, Dave, this is a really important question for you, but I know, Angelika, for you as well, how your relationship has evolved to the work has evolved because it's been in relationship with descendants. And so I really want us to dive deep into that relationship, but before we do that, I really just want everyone to know a little bit more about who both you are. So I will start with you, Dave. And could you just, again, tell us a little bit who you are and how you got into doing remembrance work?
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be in the room. It's an honor to be on this platform with Carlos and Angelika. I did not set off to do remembrance work. Sometimes I feel like remembrance work found me. Sometimes I feel like social justice work found me, and I'm very grateful for that. Gosh, for me it started about 20 years ago. I was at Penn State University in the US. I was working on my graduate work, and I was trying to write a dissertation on a different topic when I stumbled across the story of Emmett Till. If you don't know that story, and I know a lot of you in this room know this story very well, but if you don't know it, in the summer of 1955, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American boy living in Chicago. In August of that year, he took a train to the Mississippi Delta, and 3 days after he arrived, he whistled at a 21-year-old shopkeeper named Carolyn Bryant. That was an affront to the racial norms of the Jim Crow South, and 3 days after that whistle, he was kidnapped, he was tortured, he was shot, he was thrown in a river. 3 days after that, his body was found. A month later, there was a trial, and an all-white jury acquitted the murderers, who shortly thereafter confessed to the crime for which they had just been acquitted. And when I was a grad student, I found that confession online, and it began to haunt me. And I began writing about it, and I began reading about it, because those were the only two things I knew how to do. I became a professor, and like I graduated, I became a professor, and if you know what professors do, we're really good at two things. We read things and we write things, okay? And I wrote a lot of things and I read a lot of things. And that's all, but I want to stress, like, that's all I did. Like, if you have like a stereotype of a disengaged historian who sits in an ivory tower and reads things and writes things.
You're too tough on yourself. I want to slow you down. But go ahead.
Okay, I'm not going to be too tough on myself, but can we just agree that what we say in this room will stay in this room? Because I'm going to tell you some embarrassing things about myself. Did I agree to this? Well, let me tell you why I'm embarrassed. Let me tell you why, like, I say let's keep this between us, because I wrote about the story for a decade. And like, it was successful. I got promotions, I moved through the ranks, I did all the things a professor is supposed to do, but I never went to Mississippi. I never talked to someone who was related to the case. I never talked to a family member. And worse still, it didn't occur to me that I should. About a decade after I had started working on this story and reading lots of things and writing lots of things, I finally got an invitation to go to Mississippi. And this will tell you where I was at the time. When I got the invitation, I didn't jump. In fact, I declined it because I didn't think it would be important. And I'm honestly very embarrassed to say this, and what's the word? I feel it in my stomach. And in fact, on the plane, I eventually decided to go to Mississippi, but on the plane down there, and again, between us and this camera, I remember thinking that when I got to Mississippi, I would know more than everyone else down there, because I thought that to know all you needed to know, all you had to do was read all there was to read. And let me tell you how humiliated and deeply humbled I was when I arrived. First of all, because I found myself in the back seat of a car driving across the Mississippi Delta, and in the front seat was the lead FBI agent on the case from 2004 to 2006, and across from him was a historian. And let me tell you, if I did not know ahead of time that their topic was the murder of Emmett Till, I would not have even been smart enough to identify the topic of their conversation. So there was an intellectual humbling, but that's like a fraction of what mattered, because at the end of that car ride, we pulled up to Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market. It's a crumbling store in the Mississippi Delta. It's the site where Emmett Till once whistled at Carolyn Bryant. And I found myself there in conversation with Mr. Simeon Wright, who passed away in 2016. Mr. Wright was a cousin of Emmett Till. He shared a bed with young Emmett on the night that Emmett was abducted. And Mr. Wright was telling me the story, and I knew the facts of the story, but it's another thing entirely to have the story told in the first person by a survivor of the tragedy. And so if the car ride was intellectually humbling, the conversation with Mr. Wright was, I don't even know what the right word here is, but emotionally humbling maybe gets close to it. Immediately after that conversation, we went inside, and I volunteered. I'll tell you more about this in a bit, but I volunteered to help on a very small project, and I thought it would be a very small part of my life. And that small part of my life gradually came to take over and occupy the entirety of my professional life and a good portion of my personal life. And so that's why I say memory work found me, right? The trip changed me. The experience of being in community with survivors and being in service to survivors changed me. And so the second decade has been so different from the first decade, because for the last decade, I've been working very closely with the Till family in Chicago and with the nonprofit that our colleague Patrick, I don't see Patrick, but our colleague Patrick leads a nonprofit in the Mississippi Delta. But I've been working with Patrick and with the Till family as a consultant and a grant writer. And I must tell you, it's way more rewarding to work in service to them than it is to read things and write things.
And he's still really good at writing things, because when I was writing a book on Emmett Till, the person that I called to assuage my angst, because I didn't know what, I was just nervous about publishing a book on a really, really sensitive and a sacred topic, Emmett Till, the murder of Emmett Till. And so I turned to Dave Till, because I know how much he's been in service to the family. I knew that him reading my book would make sure I was channeling the right voice. And so he put my soul at ease as I was finishing my book in 2020. So he's still very good, even though he's doing this amazing community engaged work. So thank you, Dave, for that. Angelika, I would love for you to share with us, your story of how you all got started and how, perhaps as you're doing that, your relationship evolved.
Well, it's very interesting for me to be on that panel, because it seems that our approaches are very different. Our start was very different. But yesterday we already spoke with it, and we came to the similar conclusions. And this is very interesting, and so this will be more at the end, the comparisons. Well, my start was very different. It was not in the books. The books I read at the university, and they were very abstract. I studied history. It didn't touch my heart. But then I was curious. I grew up with silence. I did not know much what really was going on during the Nazi period. And then I met, I have to confess it is nearly 50 years ago, I met the so-called red grandfathers and grandmothers who were resistors during the Nazi time. And so my approach was from the beginning with people. They were willing to talk to young people in schools. And at that time there was resistance against inviting former or still at that time communists in schools. But we did. And so this was very inspiring for me, because they went through Buchenwald, they went through prisons, but their attitude was such a positive one. They wanted to change something by telling students, young people and older people as well, their stories. And so from the beginning, the approach was both tragic about what happened during the Nazi era, what happened to them, but on the other hand, inspiring and hopeful. And from around 1980 on, we concentrated a bit more on Jewish history. And one of the resistors two were from Jewish background. And one said, "Oh, my sister is joining the Frankfurt visiting program. Isn't that interesting for you?" It was interesting. So the Frankfurt City program is that since 1980, the city of Frankfurt invites former Frankfurt citizens to come back for a visit. And since 2012, this is continued with a second generation, and I think Frankfurt is the only city which does this now every year. Well, what we did was that we went to the people in the visiting program and asked them about their story. And at the beginning, we only asked them about their time in Frankfurt. This interested us the most because we wanted the connection to the places where we live, where we go to school, where we walk along. But after a while, we realized that their life is not only about Frankfurt. There was something before the Nazi time, and there was something afterwards. And so we started biographical interviews, which have a big advantage because you are not only focusing on the past, but you include the present as well. And I think this is very important. Well, what did we do? We developed programs how to prepare the students and the teachers for this program, because it has to be well prepared to have really an encounter. So the personal relationship played a big role really from the beginning. And from the 90s on, often children accompanied their parents, because one parent was already dead. And there was somehow Anhängsel.
Hangers on. Hangers on.
Hangers on. And so we had the idea to invite them for a meeting for the second generation. And this was very interesting because at that moment they got a voice. And that we did that, I think, helped the city of Frankfurt to decide to continue the program with the second generation. It was not the only aspect. And when the second generation then came, we developed the guidelines. We had how to talk to the students. And what I found out during the years, it is important that what you teach, not only in school, but also in the public, has to touch people. And local history, the places, in Oberhausen where I live, I also do guided tours along the city. The places touch you, because if you go to a house where someone lived, you have a connection to the person. And the biographical approach, there is always a link with your life, your experience, the experience your parents had. And the encounter is the most important thing, that you have the possibility to talk to people. And I don't like the hologram so much. I prefer to continue the dialogue with the second generation. And the role we have is now completely different, because now there is more an exchange. It's not that the eyewitnesses of the Nazi era talk, it's more that we exchange perspectives with each other. And the multi-perspectivity comes into the picture. So I will end at the point. I could say much more about the development of the project, but I stop at that point.
I want you to keep going, I really do.
I want to add one thing. In the 90s, I joined several seminars on facing history in ourselves. And I was active in the teachers in-service training at that time. And so Steve Black, who knew German very well, was our partner in these seminars. So I was very much inspired by the concepts we developed by facing history in ourselves. And what I said before is the special approach we have here in Germany. So I tried to combine the two approaches with each other.
That is well needed. Thank you for that really detailed description of kind of your work, but also the evolution of your relationship to the work and relationship to the survivors and descendants. What you described was a lot of cooperation, which is impressive over an extended period of time. And that's really what I would love to get into more of, the range of responses that I know. It wasn't just cooperation, there were likely other responses over the 40 years of work that you've done. So I would love to get more into the responses in Frankfurt to this work. with the city and with schools. And certainly, Dave, I would love to get into what has it meant to now travel to Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta, and actually support memory work in relationship to Emmett Till. So we can just start with Emmett Till. Can you just tell us what is your work, the memory work that you do in the Delta, and what have been some of the responses?
Places touch you. I don't know if you heard Angelika say that. Places touch you. The place touched me. And one of the results of being touched by the place was it transformed my sense of the chronology of the past. And what I mean by that is that Emmett Till was murdered in 1955, and until I traveled to Mississippi and was touched by the place, I thought that meant that the story of the murder ended in 1955. But when I traveled there and was touched by the place, perhaps the most surprising thing was I started hearing all these stories that I never knew, but these stories weren't about 1955. They were stories about people who had been living in the shadow of the murder since 1955. They were the stories of how the murder was deeply entangled with the poverty of some towns and the wealth of others. They were stories about desperation and how people clung to the story or changed the story or profited off the story. And so being touched by a place was not just an emotional thing for me, but it also fundamentally changed my approach to what it means to think about the past. So to the question of local responses, when I got down there, the issue that brought me down to the Mississippi Delta the first time was vandalism. Okay, and I know that some of you know this story. I know that I've told this story to some of you, that Patrick has told it. I'll recap here so we're all on the same page. The first and probably most basic thing you need to know is that after Emmett was murdered in August of 1955, the state of Mississippi waited 49 years and 11 months before they dropped a single dollar on Till commemoration. For a group of 18 citizens, 9 of them white and 9 of them black, living in Tallahatchie County, that's where the trial took place, the 50 years of silence was intolerable. And so they organized and they fundraised and they spent $12,000 of Morgan Freeman's money to do something that had never been done before. That is to actually tell the story publicly in the places where it happened via a collection of roadside markers. And you may know what happened next. No sooner were these signs installed than they were painted with the letters KKK. They were stolen, they were thrown into the river, they were defaced with acid, they were pulled out of the ground with pickup trucks. And most famously, they were shot. And then they were replaced, and then they were shot again and replaced again and shot again. And the vandalism became so targeted and so persistent that in July of 2014, Patrick convened this working group, and that's what first brought me down. And the working group was dedicated to the question of how do you tell the Emmett Till story in the context of vandalism. I want to tell you my initial response, and then I'll tell you my better response, okay? My initial response was that, and if you dig through the archives of small Mississippi newspapers, you can find me on record to this effect. My gut response was that the nonprofit should leave the bullet-riddled signs standing. The reason I said that and the reason I believe that is because when I looked at these signs, and you can Google them, you can get some pictures if you want, but they're purple signs with white letters. And the white letters told the story of racism in 1955. But these white letters were then peppered, punctured with bullet holes. It felt to me as if while the white letters bore witness to mid-century racism, the bullet holes bore witness to a very current racism. And the vandalized signs really helped me connect the dots. It really sort of was a tangible, sort of affect-rich way to make the point that we have not yet put behind us the racism that cost Till his life. And so that was my stand. But then I met Erica Gordon Taylor, the late Erica Gordon Taylor, cousin of Emmett Till, and she said, Dave, I get that. And she agreed that we need to sort of stress the connections between 1950s racism and 21st century racism, but she said, those bullet holes are a form of terror and we can't let terror stand. You never know, she told me, who will walk around this corner and see this sign and be terrorized. And she was right. And so, again, I found myself pivoting and working in service to both the family and the nonprofit. And you know what? I don't know who shot the signs, but if I ever meet them, I would love to tell them that they may have meant that vandalism for evil, but I would love to show them all the good that has come out of it. Yeah. Because there have been some amazing, amazing projects. And I'll just share one of them right now. We created, in collaboration with the family, in collaboration with the Emmett Till Interpretive Center, we created a smartphone app. And our logic was very simple. If it's easy to shoot a rural roadside marker, it's much harder to shoot an app. And so we took the same historical message that was on those signs, we put it on an app. The app has GPS technology, it will take you to the sites. The app first went live in 2019 with 17 sites in Mississippi. A few weeks later, the Till family in Chicago reached out and said, Dave, the app is great, but actually, Emmett was also from Chicago, and you don't have any Chicago sites. And so they invited Patrick and I and some others to spend 36 hours with them in Chicago. They took us to the sites that they cared about. They told us why they cared about these sites, and so we were able to add 5 sites in Chicago to the tour as well. When Karlos put the question to me, he wanted to talk about how the local responses have changed over time to these memorial sites, and I think that change is gradual. In good news, we haven't seen vandalism since 2019. And we are just beginning to see a kind of investment in the sites that we never would have dreamed possible. Many of these sites, before the Memory Project, had no form of commemoration, no plaque, no story, no nothing. And some of them now are beginning to get greater visibility. Yeah, so that's a way to measure some of the changing reactions.
Thank you. I always forget the microphone. Angelika, you described to me, I mentioned cooperation, a lot of cooperation between teachers, schools, the city, and then survivors, descendants. Can you talk about some challenges maybe that you face in doing the work, and maybe how you were able to, with the work, with the help of others, overcome them or get through them?
Yes, I will speak about the challenges later, but I start with a question before the responses. And I'm doing this work so long that I was able to take part, develop, and also watch the process during this time. I would like to focus on 2 aspects. The one aspect, what was the change in Germany, in Frankfurt, in Oberhausen, where I live, and the second is, what about the second generation? And the first thing is that when we started, there was even a big resistance. No one attacked us, but ignorance is somehow a resistance. And so it was, at the beginning, very difficult to work and to get a public audience. But this changed during the years, which has to do with the time which has gone. So the eyewitnesses are mostly not living anymore. Nevertheless, the descendants still have difficulties to deal with the subject, and we have to take this in account. This is one of the challenges, how to deal with the negative feelings which come up when you talk about the past. But There is a great interest in the schools. So we were also overrun by the schools who want to have someone to speak in their classes. And there is an assumption. Yesterday we had that question of the student, I do not know if he's here today, who said, what about the Muslims? There is an assumption that the migrants, and even especially the Muslims, are not interested, which is not the fact. Well, there is anti-Semitism in the communities there, but the interest to get known something of people who were perpetrated, who suffered, who were discriminated, there is a very high interest, and they always make a link about it. So inclusion in many aspects is the solution for this challenge. The communities changed because at the beginning we made memorial services. Now the communities make the services. Even sometimes the communities push people like us out and say it's our duty. But that they take this duty is really something we have achieved. Then, which was impossible years before, memorials. We were able to initiate memorials. In Oberursel, where I live, we initiated a memorial reminding the names of the ones who were related to Oberursel and who were persecuted. And in Frankfurt, through an eyewitness who is still living, she initiated, and we, as her voice, initiated a Kindertransport Memorial, which is now realized in Frankfurt. So this would not have been possible 40, 50 years ago. And so there is really a change to more openness. And I often do guided tours, and always you have people who are very interested. After 30 years doing these tours, I think everyone already joined it. Now there are always new people coming. And so in Germany, there we can look at many positive effects of the activities of initiatives. Nevertheless, one of the challenges, the initiatives are often not acknowledged enough. This has different aspects. I don't want to go into the deep. So the acknowledgement of initiatives which work on a volunteer basis is a problem. And what I just started to initiate is an archive for the results of the initiatives. Results does not only mean the interviews, but the process of the memorial work, the remembrance work. This is something very important, and many initiatives, or several, work such a long time. So it has to be saved and kept for the future. So this is already one of the questions, what has to be done in the future. Now to the second generation. At the first moment, the second generation, when we invited them to come, they were astonished. They are not from us. And when we invite them to go to the schools, they ask themselves, what can I say? That's why we developed a list of possible topics which helps them to think about, oh yes, I can talk about that. Very interesting is that we often now meet the ones whose parents or uncles or whatever we already met. And so there's always a continuation, and this is something which keeps me going on with the work, because it's through the connections. If I only would work in archives, I wouldn't continue. But this personal connection is the most important thing. And what we try also is, this is Oberursel, a little town, a little bit different than in Frankfurt. We try to connect the ones whose themselves or whose parents went to a certain school to that school. There is a higher interest of students if someone comes whose father or grandfather was at that school. And we try to connect them with places, working places, or places of origin of their ancestors. And what comes out of it is that many who come to Germany with a little bit skeptical, that they at the end say, now I understand my parents much better than before, being at the places where they lived and went to school. And for example, one said, it was Ron Summers, he said, my roots are in Frankfurt. So he realized that he has roots in America and in Frankfurt as well. So coming to the places where the parents come from is very relevant and important for the identity. And the thankfulness is incredible. The letters you get, I don't want to quote that because I don't want to show up, but everyone who experiences this gets letters. I get it very often. And it shows that this work is very relevant and that friendships come out of it and that there is something which was not before, that there is a feeling that each side can share, take part, give each other something. And there is more a collaboration now than before. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And you set us up so well to talk about the future of remembrance work. And this is something. This is a question that's really important to me because this is something that I think about. What kind of remembrance work will I do, and what impact might it have in the future? So I'm going to pose it to two people more able to answer that question than me. What is or will be the role of kind of local remembrance projects in combating, we could say combating a lot of things, but what will be their role, and maybe even your work, how it would play a role in the future?
So I had an answer jotted down, but I must say, Angelika just inspired me a little bit. And in some ways, like, I hope that the future of memory work in the US looks like the problem, right? That Angelika is, look, did you hear? Like, she's struggling to archive all the various memorial efforts. I'm like, would that we had so many memorial efforts that we needed, like, that our problem was archiving them. So, like, this is my dream, right? And honestly, like, this is my first time in Germany, and coming from the US, one of, like, my strongest just gut impressions is the strength of the memorial culture here, right? It's like, I don't know, perhaps it's just the company I'm keeping, but it's like, you just have to scratch a little bit and there's memorial culture, right? And it's very touching and very inspiring. So I hope that's our future. As, I've been thinking about these sites, right? The grocery store, the barn where Emmett Till was beaten, the river site where he was recovered, the church where his uncle worshipped, the home where he stayed. You know what each of those sites have in common? That 5 years ago there was nothing there, okay? And so, because of that, I feel like I've spent a lot of time dreaming about things I want to build, about plaques I want to write, signs I want to erect, museums I want to build, right? And I do want to do all those things, and I am, like, if you want to set me rambling, just say, Dave, what would you love to see happen at this site? Okay, but here's the thing. Monuments don't remember the past, people do, right? And I was reminded of this yesterday over lunch with the students from the area. One of them, I heard this from Patrick, who heard it from a student, so I want to give credit where credit's due, but the student put the bug in Patrick's ear and said, why don't you guys, instead of, like, just building something, have, like, a competition to build something and let the competition stretch out over years, right? And I thought that was a beautiful vision because, I tend towards impatience And when I see these sites still unmarked after 60 years, like part of me just says, I want to build something now. But when I heard that student's idea, and honestly, I don't know who you are, I don't know who you all were that sparked the idea, but it set Patrick and I talking all afternoon, right? And one of the things that we were really getting excited about was precisely the fact that if we did it this way, we would stretch it out even further, right? Because through the process of spending a decade thinking in a collaborative, a descendant-focused, intentional way about remembrance, one of the effects would be that we wouldn't be relying on monuments or smartphone apps to do the memory work for us. But ideally, we would be drawing lots of people into a conversation. And it strikes me that until people are thinking about it, and until people are wrestling with what should we do at this site, it's only then that memory will be safe. So I guess my dream of the future, like I do want to build things, and I want to see these sites marked in permanent ways, but I want to see that at the end of a long process in which lots of people think hard and flood the imagination with so many ideas about how we might tell the story in the future.
Well, that's a powerful vision. Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to turn to you and ask you the very same question. What is the role of local remembrance work in the future?
Well, I think it is important to change the focus, that you not only look at the stories the victims or the immigrants tell, but you have to listen to each other's story. This means the stories of the one whose parents were in whatever role, or grandparents in whatever role during the Nazi era, and the migrant stories as well. And so the multi-perspectivity is, I think, very important, and an equality of each story. There is not a hierarchy of a better or a worse story. Each one has to be heard with the story, with the fears, with anger, whatever. This is very important if we form a society where everyone is encouraged to do something to fight for justice and equality. So this is the one thing I think is very important. And I made very positive experiences in my multicultural classes I was teaching. But what I said was in general for the society. The second thing I'm dreaming of for the future is to come away from black and white painting. It is very important to realize the complexity of the past and of today as well. And there is often a tendency, especially I watched that when the war in the Ukraine started. There is now only either or, either weapons to the Ukraine or peace. There is a lot in between. And so we have to come away from this black and white coloring. And we have to realize I'm coming from a background with parents. The one was a member of the Nazi party, and the other one was close to the confessing church. So I have many aspects in the biography of my family. You have also to realize that there are many things taking place at the same time. Positive and negative things as well. And there is a tendency only to see one thing. You have to see both, and you have to deal with ambivalence anyhow. You have to see many sides, and you have to face that people, including myself, sometimes act contradictory. So we are not only one line very clear, so sometimes we do something wrong or do something which is against our aims. So this is the human nature. And the thing which inspired me through facing history and ourselves is to allow connections. Connections does not mean to paralyze the Nazi era and other conflicts in today or in other countries, but to look what you can take out for yourself, what makes a link with you. And I developed a complex of 4 questions for students which after encounters. What was especially remarkable for me, not in general, or I do not ask what did the speaker wants to tell us. I ask what was remarkable for you. What was new or surprising for you? If something surprises you, you realize what you learned. So it makes the learning process aware. What made you angry or irritated you also links to something you have to deal with and you are not quite clear, and especially what new questions came up. And these are all questions which does not tell you, please compare it with the Ukraine war. It's something, it comes out of yourself. And the students often wrote letters to the survivors whom they met, and in these letters they quote these questions. And one time I got a response from a survivor said, "Oh, there was a certain pattern behind the letters." I said, "Yes, I can explain it to you." There was a reason why. Well, and the last point I would like to make is that remembrance work, or to solve the problems of today, has to be done together. Despite of all differences of backgrounds, of religion, we have the same task to solve the problems of today. And so we have to come to the point that remembrance work is a task which we have in common, including the young guy who asked that question yesterday. So everyone should be included, and because it is necessary to look back to find out what we want to have and are dreaming of in the future. And last year, Wendy was a visitor of the city of Frankfurt, and I want to end with her quote. She said, "Together we have much work to do."
Yes. 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 I affirm that, absolutely. And I want to reiterate and reaffirm what you said. If remembrance work must be done together, right? And the reason that I think it must be done together is that's where the healing, community healing is. If it's not done together, then it's not really healing in a community fashion. So the together, doing it together, and you really stress them bringing together the multiple perspectives and multiple identities. That's the doing the work is where the healing is. It's not in the finished result. It's in getting to the finished result and all the work that goes into that requires community building, right? And the community building equates ultimately to the healing. And so thank you for really articulating that and just helping us to think about that. You also kind of began to talk about what is needed, what is required for remembrance workers in the future. And so Dave, I just want to kick that question to you first, because we do have remembrance workers, young, aspiring remembrance workers in the room. And I still feel like I'm aspiring too. So could you, in your experiences in the Delta, with the working very closely with the family, with Memorial Project, can you just help, some of the veteran remembrance workers, but also aspiring remembrance workers, what is needed, what is maybe required for doing this work?
Good question. How about two things? First, don't be me, right? Go to the places, talk to the people. Remember what Angelika said, memory work is work that can only be done together. I think that's true on so many levels. So, in another sense, I mean, I think my story, I hope, could be inspirational in one sense, right? That I'm not here because I had some grand plan. I'm not here because I thought it out well and did it perfectly. I'm here because memory work found me and captured me. So I feel like no matter where you are, right, there is a path forward if you are willing to be involved. Memory work will find you and it will capture you. So I feel like it's an open field. And the second thing I'd just say is keep your eyes on the prize. I mean, Karlos was talking about like the end of memory work is healing. And just to like keep your eyes on that end goal. I don't know if any of you saw the feature-length film titled Till that came out in October of this past year. I'm not going to give you any spoilers. I'm not even going to tell here. I'm just going to tell you one thing I like about it. I like that at the end of the movie, and this is controversial, a lot of people don't like this part, but I like that at the end of the movie, Emmett's mother, Mamie Till Mobley, has a vision of a restored, healthy, and whole Emmett Till. Here's why I like it. I like it because the point of memory work is restoration. And I love that at the end of that particular piece of memory work, we have a very concrete image of a restored body. And so I would just say kind of keep your eyes on the prize, that the reason we do this work and the reason that we do it together is for purposes of restoration.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, we are over. Okay. Well, I think I'm gonna let you get to that response as we answer your questions. Are there any questions that we have for the speakers? We have one here.
Hello, excuse my bad English. You're saying memory work can heal, but don't you think justice could heal too the society that been hurted and suffering from injustice? And I know we've been working about genocide with my students, and we worked about what happens in Rwanda and what happens in ex-Yugoslavia, what happens during the World War II. And it seems that justice needs to be done to totally and perfectly heal the people who suffered. So how can we manage to do memory work and justice at the same time? It's a big question. It's a kind of reflections more than a question.
Thank you for that. I think I heard the question is about the relationship between memory work and justice work, and it's a super important question, and I appreciate you putting it on the table. I can only hint here and gesture, but in the history of memory work in the US, and even more particular in the history of memory work in the state of Mississippi that focuses on racial injustice, you can quickly see memory work relating to justice in different ways at different times. Example, Philadelphia, Mississippi, the site of the murdered 3 civil rights workers. It was a memory commission that recruited survivors and descendants, collected them into a group. They started telling stories, and in the process of that storytelling, that led to a 40-year late legal conviction, okay? 60 miles west of Philadelphia, Mississippi is Tallahatchie County, where the Till story is located. And there, justice and memory work look very different, okay? As you may know, the last living person who could ever have been charged in the legal system passed away about a month ago. So we now know that there will never be justice in a legal sense. And here I'll just channel Emmett Till's last living cousin and childhood best friend, the Reverend Wheeler Parker from Chicago. Reverend Parker has always supported legal justice, but he's always said that at the same time there's a different prize. Not better, we're just a different prize. And he calls it sometimes narrative justice, sometimes he calls it restorative justice. I think of it as memory work. And for Reverend Parker, they were never in tension. Like, let's pursue both legal justice, but regardless of how that turns out, let's pursue memory work as well.
I would like to add something, because justice is very difficult. Often justice is just discussed about reparation, restitution. And what I just told, especially about the second generation, the first as well, the aspect of the storytelling plays a very important role. And this was, for example, in the Truth Commission, it played an important role, that the voices of the ones who were perpetrated were heard. And when the survivors, immigrants, their children come to the classes, they always find it very positive that someone in Germany listens to them, asks them questions. It gives them a great relief. And this is also part of justice. It's not only money or a court, it's hearing the voices of the people who have to suffer, who had to suffer.
Thank you. Do we have one more question? We have a question.
I will start for this because my question is less a question, but also just a real big thank you. I just were caught in my reflections about how grateful I am that there is a kind of ambiguity, or it seems at first that this not works together, but working on subject, we all work on subjects where millions of people just died, were persecuted, the histories we heard of Emmett Till, like these cruel things that happened, but on the other hand, I will send to this work because we have minors here, but it's this F with 7 little stars. Great time we're having here. I'm feeling well, sharing emotions and getting taken by the hand by elderly people or persons who have lots of experience in this field. And I just wanted to say thank you to the entire organization, to all the persons taking the time, working with younger students, interesting persons who don't even know that there's an interesting field waiting for them. And I just wanted, because it was growing this expression, this idea, wanted just to say thank you to everyone, everybody, just working together, young and old, from different religions, cultural, social backgrounds. It was just wanted to go out from me. That's why I just wanted to stay ahead.
Can you say your name? Can you say your name? Say it again. Cedric. So thank you, Cedric. I just want to, can I go ahead and wrap up, Lily? Yes. I just want to thank Dave. This has been a really emotional listen to Dave Till as well as Angelika. And I just want to thank both of them, and I want you to join in the spirit of Cedric in thanking them for this wonderful conversation.